The Malleus Maleficarum. Part 2, Question 2. Chapter 7. Remedies prescribed against hailstorms, and for animals that are bewitched. With regard to the remedies for bewitched animals, and charms against tempests, we must first note some unlawful remedies which are practiced by certain people. For these are done by means of superstitious words or actions, as when men cure the worms in the fingers or limbs by means of certain words or charms, the method of deciding the legality of which has been explained in the preceding chapter. There are others who do not sprinkle holy water over bewitched cattle, but pour it into their mouths. Beside the proofs we have already given that the remedy of words is unlawful, William of Paris, whom we have often quoted, gives the following reason. If there were any virtue in words as words, then it would be due to one of three things, either their material, which is air, or their form, which is sound, or their meaning, or else to all three together. Now it cannot be due to air, which has no power to kill unless it be poisonous, neither can it be due to sound, the power of which is broken by a more solid object, neither can it be due to the meaning, for in that case the words devil or death or hell would always be harmful, and the words health and goodness always be beneficial. Also it cannot be due to all these three together, for when the parts of a whole are invalid, the whole itself is also invalid. And it cannot validly be objected that God gave virtue to words just as he did to herbs and stones. For whatever virtue there is in certain sacramental words and benedictions and lawful incantations belongs to them, not as words, but by divine institution and ordinance according to God's promise. It is, as it were, a promise from God that whoever does such and such a thing will receive such and such a grace. And so the words of the sacraments are effective because of their meaning, although some hold that they have an intrinsic virtue, but these two opinions are not mutually inconsistent. But the case of other words and incantations is clear from what has already been said, for the mere composing or uttering or writing of words, as such, can have no effect, but the invocation of the divine name, and public prayer, which is a sacred protestation committing the effect to the divine will, are beneficial. We have treated above of remedies performed by actions which seem to be unlawful. The following is a common practice in parts of Swabia. On the 1st of May before sunrise the women of the village go out and gather from the woods leaves and branches from willow trees, and weave them into a wreath which they hang over the stable door, affirming that all the cattle will then remain unhurt and safe from witchcraft for a whole year. And in the opinion of those who hold that vanity may be opposed by vanity, this remedy would not be unlawful, and neither would be the driving away of diseases by unknown cantrips and incantations. But without meaning and offense, we say that a woman or anyone else may go out on the 1st or any other day of the month, without considering the rising or the setting of the sun, and collect herbs or leaves and branches, saying the Lord's Prayer or the Creed, and hang them over the stable door in good faith, trusting to the will of God for their protective efficacy, yet even so the practice is not above reproach, as was shown in the preceding chapter in the words of S. Jerome, for even if he is not invoked, the devil has some part in the efficacy of herbs and stones. It is the same with those who make the sign of the cross with leaves and consecrated flowers on Palm Sunday, and set it up among their vines or crops, asserting that, although the crops all round should be destroyed by hail, yet they will remain unharmed in their own fields. Such matters should be decided upon according to the distinction of which we have already treated. Similarly there are women who, for the preservation of milk and that cows should not be deprived of their milk by witchcraft, give freely to the poor in God's name the whole of a Sunday's yield of milk, and say that, by this sort of alms, the cows yield even more milk and are preserved from witchcraft. This need not be regarded as superstitious, provided that it is done out of pity for the poor, and that they implore the divine mercy for the protection of their cattle, leaving the effect to the good pleasure of divine providence. Again, Nitter in the first chapter of his Preceptorium says that it is lawful to bless cattle, in the same way as sick men, by means of written charms and sacred words, even if they have the appearance of incantations, as long as the 7 conditions we have mentioned are observed. For he says that devout persons and virgins have been known to sign a cow with the sign of the cross, together with the Lord's Prayer and the angelic salutation, upon which the devil's work has been driven off, if it is due to witchcraft. And in his Formicarius he tells that witches confess that their witchcraft is obstructed by the reverent observation of the ceremonies of the Church, as by the aspersion of holy water, or the consumption of consecrated salt, by the lawful use of candles on the day of purification and of blessed palms, and such things. For this reason the Church uses these in her exorcisms, that they may lessen the power of the devil. Also, because when witches wish to deprive a cow of milk they are in the habit of begging a little of the milk or butter which comes from that cow, so that they may afterwards by their art bewitch the cow. Therefore women should take care, when they are asked by persons suspected of this crime, not to give away the least thing to them. Again, there are women who, when they have been turning a church for a long while to no purpose, and if they suspect that this is due to some witch, procure if possible a little butter from the house of that witch. Then they make that butter into 3 pieces and throw them into the churn, invoking the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, and so all witchcraft is put to flight. Here again it is a case of opposing vanity to vanity, for the simple reason that the butter must be borrowed from the suspected witch. But if it were done without this, if with the invocation of the Holy Trinity and the Lord's Prayer the woman were to commit the effect of the divine will, she would remain beyond reproach. Nevertheless it is not a commendable practice to throw in the 3 pieces of butter, for it would be better to banish the witchcraft by means of sprinkling holy water or putting in some exorcised salt, always with the prayers we have mentioned. Again, since often the whole of a person's cattle are destroyed by witchcraft, those who have suffered in this way ought to take care to remove the soil under the threshold of the stable or stall, and where the cattle go to water, and replace it with fresh soil sprinkled with holy water. For witches have often confessed that they have placed some instrument of witchcraft at the instance of devils. They have only had to make a hole in which the devil has placed the instrument of witchcraft, and that this was a visible object, such as a stone or a piece of wood or a mouse or some serpent. For it is agreed that the devil can perform such things by himself without the need of any partner, but usually, for the perdition of her soul, he compels a witch to cooperate with him. In addition to the setting up of the sign of the cross which we have mentioned, the following procedure is practiced against hailstorms and tempests. 3 of the hailstones are thrown into the fire with an invocation of the Most Holy Trinity, and the Lord's Prayer and the angelic salutation are repeated 2 or 3 times, together with the Gospel of S. John, "In the beginning was the Word." And the sign of the cross is made in every direction towards each quarter of the world. Finally, "The Word was made flesh" is repeated 3 times, and 3 times, "By the words of this gospel may this tempest be dispersed." And suddenly, if the tempest is due to witchcraft, it will cease. This is most true and need not be regarded with any suspicion. For if the hailstones were thrown into the fire without the invocation of the divine name, then it would be considered superstitious. But it may be asked whether the tempest could not be stilled without the use of those hailstones. We answer that it is the other sacred words that are chiefly effective, but by throwing in the hailstones a man means to torment the devil, and tries to destroy his works by the invocation of the Holy Trinity. And he throws them into the fire rather than into water, because the more quickly they are dissolved the sooner is the devil's work destroyed. But he must commit to the divine will the effect which is hoped for. Relevant to this is the reply given by a witch to a judge who asked her if there were any means of stilling a tempest raised by witchcraft. She answered, "Yes, by this means. I adjure you, hailstorms and winds, by the 5 wounds of Christ, and by the 3 nails which pierced his hands and feet, and by the 4 holy evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that you be dissolved and fall as rain." Many also confess, some freely and some under stress of torture, that there are 5 things by which they are much hindered, sometimes entirely, sometimes in part, sometimes so that they cannot harm his friends. And these are: that a man should have a pure faith and keep the commandments of God, that he should protect himself with the sign of the cross and with prayer, that he should reverence the rites and ceremonies of the church, that he should be diligent in the performance of public justice, and that he should meditate aloud or in his heart on the passion of Christ. And of these things Nitter also speaks. And for this reason it is a general practice of the Church to ring bells as a protection against storms, both that the devils may flee from them as being consecrated to God and refrain from their wickedness. And also that the people may be roused up to invoke God against tempests with the sacrament of the altar and sacred words, following the very ancient custom of the Church in France and Germany. But since this method of carrying out the sacrament to still a storm seems to many a little superstitious, because they do not understand the rules by which it is possible to distinguish between that which is superstitious and that which is not, therefore it must be considered that 5 rules are given by which anyone may know whether an action is superstitious, that is, outside the observances of the Christian religion, or whether it is in accordance with the due and proper worship and honor of God, proceeding from the true virtue of religion both in the thoughts of the heart and in the actions of the body. For these are explained in the gloss on Colossians 2, where Paul says, "Which things have a show of wisdom in superstition," and the gloss says, "Superstition is religion observed without due discipline," as was said before. The first of these is, that in all our works the glory of God ought to be our chief aim, as it is said, "Whether ye eat or drink, or whatsoever else ye do, do all in the glory of God." Therefore in every work relating to the Christian religion let care be taken that it is to the glory of God, and that in it man should give the glory chiefly to God, so that by that very work the mind of man may be put in subjection to God. And although, according to this rule, the ceremonies and legal procedures of the Old Testament are not now observed, since they are to be understood figuratively, whereas the truth is made known in the New Testament, yet the carrying out of the sacrament or of relics to still a storm does not seem to militate against this rule. The second rule is that care should be taken that the work is a discipline to restrain concupiscence, or a bodily abstinence, but in the way that is owed to virtue, that is, according to the rites of the Church and moral doctrine. For Paul says, Romans 12, "Let your service be reasonable." And because of this rule, they are foolish who make a vow not to comb their hair on the Sabbath, or who fast on Sunday, saying, "The better the day the better the deed," and such like. But again it does not seem that it is superstitious to carry out the sacrament, etc. The third rule is to be sure that what is done is in accordance with the statutes of the Catholic Church, or with the witness of Holy Scripture, or according at least to the rites of some particular church, or in accordance with universal use, which Augustine says may be taken as a law. Accordingly, when the bishops of the English were in doubt because the Mass was celebrated in different manners in different churches, Gregory wrote to them that they might use whatever methods they found most pleasing to God, whether they followed the rites of the Roman or of the Gallican or of any other church. For the fact that different churches have different methods in divine worship does not militate against the truth, and therefore such customs are to be preserved, and it is unlawful to neglect them. And so, as we said in the beginning, it is a very ancient custom in the churches of France and some parts of Germany, after the consecration of the Eucharist, to carry it out into the open, and this cannot be unlawful, provided that it is not carried exposed to the air, but enclosed and contained in a pyx. The fourth rule is to take care that what is done bears some natural relation to the effect which is expected, for if it does not, it is judged to be superstitious. On this account unknown characters and suspected names, and the images or charts of necromancers and astronomer, are altogether to be condemned as suspect. But we cannot say that on this account it is superstitious to carry out holy relics or the Eucharist as a protection against the plagues of the devil, for it is rather a most religious and salutary practice, since in that sacrament lies all our help against the adversary. The fifth rule is to be careful that what is done should give no occasion for scandal or stumbling, for in that case, although it be not superstitious, yet because of the scandal it should be foregone or postponed, or done secretly without scandal. Therefore if this carrying of the sacrament can be done without scandal, or even secretly, then it should not be neglected. For by this rule many secular priests neglect the use of benedictions by means of devout words either uttered over the sick or bound round their necks. I say that nothing should be done, at least publicly, if it can give any occasion of stumbling to other simple folk. Let this be enough on the subject of the remedies against hailstorms, either by words or lawful actions.